audience.
Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Luby Lane. I'm founder and executive director of Get Lit Words Ignite. It's so nice to be here.
I am thrilled you're here. What's the age of the kids in your program?
We start at fourth grade and we stay with young people really through college. I mean, our sweet spot is usually, and most of the children that we serve are in high school, but it's really fourth grade through. There's 25-year-olds that are still a part of our family.
No kidding.
Yeah.
They can't leave, right? That's exciting. And then is this, tell me more, tell our audience more about the program. Is this a destination, or are you out in the schools?
We're in the schools. So in 2006, I wrote an original curriculum, and was like this idea. If we introduce classic, we say a classic isn't a classic because it's old, but because it's great. So a piece of poetry could be contemporary, but just something that's wonderful to young people. Would they claim their poem? Would they raise their hand and claim it? Which means if they hear a piece that they identify with, they'll say, that's my poem. They'll memorize it, perform it, and then respond by writing their own poem back. So they're kind of in conversation with a great poet, and learning to express themselves through their words, and then finally their own. But so it started as an in-school program, but then when we graduated our first class of poets, they didn't want to leave and they wanted to start coming after school. So we started something called the Get Lit Players, and we started meeting on Saturdays all day. And so since 2006, we've run a really full in-school program and after school program as well.
Were you a teacher before this?
No, I had taught a lot of classes. I was with Screen Actors Guild, and I had visited a lot of classrooms and read to a lot of students for years and years, but I was a writer and I was an actor, and I wrote, but books have deeply impacted me.
Sure.
And I mean, deeply, 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 deeply. So I wrote a one-person show about books called Deep Sea Diving. One of the characters that I played in the show was a poet, Jimmy Santiago Baca. I invited him to come, and he came with his buddy, this guy with a ponytail watching, who I didn't know who it was. Turns out it was Taylor Hackford, the director of Ray.
Wow.
He had directed Jimmy's movie called Blood In, Blood Out, which is a classic in everywhere, but especially Los Angeles. So they came, they watched the show, and they said afterwards, if you retool this to travel, come with me. Jimmy said, come with me and I will bring you on the road. So through that experience, I got to visit young people at high schools and universities and detention centers and prisons and everywhere, and just bring my experience with books to them. Jimmy has had the identical same love relationship with books, but a very different life. So together we told our story, and I learned how much I loved young people and how much I wanted to keep working with them.
I go back to the bit about prisons. There's a very rich tradition of TEDx inside of prisons. There was a great talk by JR at this year's main TED, where he did a big art project inside a prison up north here in California. What's that? Is it prison or is it juvenile halls that you were going to? And not that it makes a difference.
Yeah, both. Jimmy does a lot of work in prisons. He learned to read and write in maximum security prison, and he was in solitary confinement, and just it's really his mission to serve people that are incarcerated and bring them this work and this. So, and also I worked with Tim Robbins and the Actors Gang for a long time. They do a lot of great work in prisons. So prisons, but primarily with me, it was gang detention centers and juvenile detention homes.
So a question I have right off the bat, because I don't know the demographic of the kids that you work with, are they just regular, any kid, or is there a focus on at-risk or marginalized kids?
Well, I started Get Lit in Los Angeles. We're in many, many, many school districts now outside of LAUSD, but Los Angeles Unified, you would say, I don't know, it's something like 75% roughly of our schools are Title I, which means that students receive free and reduced lunch.
Yeah.
So you could say that there's many different ways to define, that, but let's just say that most of our programs are in LAUSD schools, but we serve young people everywhere. young people have a lot of, you're growing up and your emotions are so heightened, and sometimes you're in family situations that are wonderful and positive, and sometimes you're not, but you're just going through all of it, oftentimes feeling very alone. And sometimes, I guess what I'm trying to say is that all young people are at risk. They're at risk of
Sure.
heartache for the first time, and coming into the world for the first time, and expressing themselves and learning their
Yeah.
own genius.
Yeah.
So we just serve and love them all.
That's the perfect answer. And that is so true. Tell me, words matter, and books matter, and ELA, or English language arts, matters. And having someone who can get them the program that can get them excited. I was very disappointed when my daughter was in high school, and I went to the parent teacher event, and I asked about poetry. And they said, "Oh, we don't have time to teach poetry. We're teaching all this other stuff." And I was like, "Whoa, hold it. That doesn't work." So has this integrated in the curriculum, or is it still an after school type of thing?
It's integrated in the
Oh,
curriculum,
oh, great. Great.
which is the game changer. Because if we ask students to stay after school for a poetry class, how many kids will show up? And maybe it's the same day as driver's ed, and then you'll lose half of them. So
Yeah.
it's during the day. It's in California, you say it's aligned through A through G standards. So it's a
Yeah.
rigorous academic course. Sometimes schools use it for their honor students. And sometimes there was a time when LAUSD used it for their 9th and 10th grade uh, students that needed extra help. So like different schools use it in different ways, but it satisfies the English requirement. It's either supplemental a course, or it's the whole English course. And just this year, we worked with all these outside experts, and we made an English/ethnic studies course for 9th through 10th and 11th through 12th. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
really, really, really
Wow.
rich.
So one of the things you said when we first got started, it was not about just writing the poetry, but about performing. And I've always thought of poetry as something to be read, and in very rare instances to be listened to. And then it's not really called poetry, it's called spoken word. So help our audience understand the importance of the performance aspect of poetry.
Yes, that's such a great question. Poetry was originally delivered orally, so we have a long tradition, Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey, way back in the Ennead, of these things being delivered for audiences where people could hear it and feel it. So that has gotten lost over all these years. It's become a page. A lot of times poetry is something that you read on the page. And then there's a lot of cliches if you watch The Simpsons about, beat poets with their beret and they're snapping and, in the coffee shop. But just I was introduced to poetry when I was in high school, sort of. I was given like one poem, maybe two. I read I love Walt Whitman so much, but I was asked to read "Oh Captain, My Captain" by Walt Whitman, and I'm in New Jersey, and all I care about is my hair and my boyfriend, and I'm reading this old guy that's dead that is in love with the president. It was like, why? All of it was so random. It didn't impact me. But when I moved to New York City, I met later in my early 20s, I met an actress named Vivica Lindfors, and she stepped into my theater group and she started performing poetry. And she was Swedish and absolutely extraordinary, a Broadway star, and very just gorgeous with silver hair, and a very dramatic person. And she did, in about 15 minutes, she performed Walt Whitman. And then right after, and it sounded like a megaphone in her voice. "Has anyone supposed it lucky to be born?" It was like, it was such a visceral experience.
Yeah.
And then on a dime, she turned and she performed Anne Frank receiving her first kiss, playing a 12-year-old, and she did it. And I mean, it was just the most extraordinary demonstration of how poetry can and should make you feel. And that's when I realized I felt so sad for myself. I had always loved books and always loved authors, and I missed all of the poetry and all the poets. And I was very sad about that. And I set to change that, and then to bring it to other people.
There's TED has had some very amazing spoken word on the TED stage, and I'm constantly, which is part of what had connected us here, was that when we get back to doing a live event, I'm going to invite you now in front of everybody to bring some of the kids up to do some pieces. We'll really look forward to that. Tell me, what has been the biggest surprise of the work that you could share with our audience?
Well, I think the first time I stepped into a classroom, I taught 3 classrooms together. I used to pay a babysitter and go for free teach at Fremont, Fairfax, and Walt Whitman High School, a
Wow.
continuation school. Fremont was really far away, and it was all these articles are written about problems that they were having in the school. And Fairfax, which is right by my house, these are major, big schools.
Yeah, they are.
And classrooms of 40 kids. And I went back to Pat Abrams, who, had booked us with Jimmy Baca. And I said, can I bring this program into your school? She said, I'm not paying you. And I, defensive, they don't want outsiders, it's like, take your thing, your great solution, and go home. And I'm like, I have an outside grant, no problem. Of course I didn't, but I just wanted to see, I feel greatly indebted to my authors. Like, I will live for the rest of my life just thanking them for what they gave me. And I also feel so much for kids that oftentimes I think feel warehoused, just stuck somewhere without anything to deeply reach them. Who are you? Connect with them. You're brilliant. You're interesting right now. Not when you have a college degree in 18 years, but like right now, who are you? We're missing that window. So I went to the classroom in Fairfax with this experiment. Would it work to take these poems I'd collected for 10 years, these dramatic poems I learned from Vivica, what can pop off the page? Would kids raise their hand and claim it? And the teachers were like, they're not going to. They're not going to like these boring things. Kids don't like poetry.
Guess
watch
what?
them fight over poems was the biggest shock of my life. And just to realize it does work. And just as I am, they are. This is a real thing. And then, of course, to hear their own stories, and then to watch the community. If a young person has a grandparent that they love more than anyone else in their life, and they're dying, that grandparent's dying, and they have no way to process that or talk about that, to get to watch them process that with their teacher, other classmates, build community, changing the culture of that class, of that school through poetry. It's like, it's amazing.
You remind me of my wife's grandmother, just passed at 102 years old.
Wow.
But for the last several years, we go and visit very, very regularly, a couple times a week. But one of the favorite things for her to do was to recite poems that her grandmother had taught her when she was really young. And it's interesting how she could remember the cadence and the words perfectly, long pieces, and how much of a smile that would bring to her face, right? That you can feel that somatic relationship they have with the words. One of the groups we pay attention to are the early kids and early childhood education. You said you start at 4th grade. Is that about when they can start making sentences and start understanding conceptual thinking and presentation?
No, I also taught, there's a Korean exchange program at UCLA, and I taught kids from kindergarten through 7th through 17, and it was also extraordinary. It works at absolutely any age. My own children, when they were 4th graders at Larchmont Charter, I just taught the whole class poetry. When I visited the classes one time, it was like 30 kids in a row, 3 hours back. Now my son is in college, but a long time ago, it started in 4th grade because it was a very receptive teacher that after I taught that first year, he kept it going. But honestly, it works for kindergartners. We're in talks right now with some people through Los Angeles Unified School District about bringing it to our younger students. It works for every age. And when you put your 1st grader up to perform that Maya Angelou piece, you just feel the pride they have, and then their own original poem. I mean, I still remember a play. I was so shy. I was never in any plays in high school, or elementary school or anything. I missed the whole boat. But I performed The Grass when I was in the 1st grade. The Grass. It's like 4 lines, the lamest thing ever. I still remember it to this day. It meant so much to me. So honestly, this is work that's good your whole life.
Have you, I'm going to guess Amanda Gorman is on a playlist for the kids.
Of course, she's wonderful. The first year that she ran for poet laureate in Los Angeles, I was one of 4 people on the committee that selected her. I'm not patting myself on the
No.
back because if you saw her resume, it'd be
Wow.
like, duh. She was just like, it's like I still remember reading about her and seeing her poems that year. It's like they were lit in neon. She was so extraordinary. But yeah, she's just incredible. She's wonderful.
Diane, I am so happy to hear these stories and so happy you're working with kids. You're making a huge difference.
Thank you. Well, she was from a wonderful program in Los Angeles called Right Girl. She was not part of Get Lit's program, but I was lucky enough to be on that poet laureate committee just to see her early work and watch this young woman take the stage as, you know, an anonymous person, and watch that trajectory and watch the world find out what spoken word is, because that's been, you know, an extraordinary thing to see.
What a gift.